The dirty deeds thing was really to create historical, geographically proximate examples so that people knew in real terms, oh, this happened right here. We'll show the language. No Armenians, no Italians, no Jews, nobody of Black descent, no Irish. That's still on the books. And we want people to realize that the existence of segregated communities in Greater Boston today and the differential in net worth are the results of intentional public policies 100 years ago. So the whole point was to say, we did this. You can't unmake it all. How do you respond? How do we not keep doing it? And how do we, in good faith, say, all right, we did this, there are advantages. How do we make it right?
It's a good life motto there. How am I going to make this right? To be human is to be flawed. You're going to make mistakes, but how am I going to make this right? What if the most innovative housing model in Massachusetts isn't coming from a luxury developer? It's coming from a nonprofit? I'm Rens, and in this episode of Design Development, we're speaking with Andrew Mackenzie DeFranza, Executive Director of Harborlight Homes, a nonprofit housing organization with nearly 70 years of experience serving the most economically vulnerable people north of Boston. Andrew and his team have built something rare, a fully integrated model where affordable housing development, property management, and wraparound resident services work together to create measurable outcomes for the people they serve. Frail seniors who can age in community, formerly homeless families with kids in school and growing incomes. The insight at the core of Harborlight's work is simple but profound. Housing alone isn't enough, but housing plus the right services create outcomes no market rate developer can claim. For developers, architects, and builders in the audience, Andrew's framework for navigating zoning barriers, funding constraints, and community opposition is a masterclass in delivering complex projects that matter. Let's dive in. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on Design Development. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm a big advocate for mission-driven organizations, and I don't know that there's a better mission out there than the one Harborlight Homes is chasing. So if you could tell the audience more about the origin and the mission behind Harborlight Homes.
Harborlight Homes is a community development corporation. We've been around for almost 70 years, and we were founded in our earliest form by a church north of Boston to create housing opportunity for really economically vulnerable people. We've since then, we're really kind of an aggregation of about 8 or 9 small groups that we're all interested in housing economically vulnerable people north of Boston, but struggled over the years with scale and operational capacity. So what we've evolved into is the packing together of those 8 or 9 groups to create a locally sensitive organization that has the capacity to create, operate, advocate for affordable housing and add some interesting service dimensions for really populations that are vulnerable beyond economics. So frail seniors, people with disabilities, homeless individuals, that sort of
thing. Yeah, that's important work there. And you mentioned nearly 70 years old, and then you brought these smaller organizations together to when did those organizations come together for Harborlight?
Yeah, so the church, the First Baptist Church in Beverly founded the sort of oldest entity in the early 60s. These other groups were kind of parallel play around the region north of Boston. And then in 2007, we came through a strategic planning process that we wanted to be the housing provider regionally north of Boston and take the capacity and apply it. So in 2007, we went through a strategic planning process. We merged together 6 entities in 2009. And then we merged together into that entity, we merged in, I think, another 3 over the next 2 years. So by the end of 2011, more or less, there was about 9 entities that had affiliated.
Very cool. Thanks for walking us through that. So tell us more. How many people are on the team and say assets under management or developments? How do you kind of describe the work you do?
Yeah, so we have about 50 people in-house. And as I mentioned, we do 4 functional things. We develop real estate, we operate and manage our own real estate, resident services, and then advocacy and education. So in those 4 buckets, there are 50 plus people, give or take, and then a lot of collaborative relationships, either via contract, MOU, or otherwise. We are involved in about 11 of the communities that are in our footprint. We can work anywhere from, say, Lynn to the New Hampshire border. We don't do any work in Lawrence because we have a peer there that we really respect and support what they're doing. But we can work anywhere else. So in 11 of those communities, we're active. We have about 700 and so units that have been developed. We're housing about 1,000 people. We're in construction on 2 projects right now, one in Rowley and one in Hamilton. We have 2 other sites that are permitted and waiting in line for funding, one in Ipswich and one in Lynn. And then we have about another 6 projects that are in that cooker, either going through permitting. We just permitted one in Gloucester. We're permitting a second in Gloucester and a third in Salem over the next couple of months. And then we have a few behind that. So at any given time, we're sort of cooking 12 deals in different stages, and but yeah, that gives you the scenario all the way. And that's from our biggest project is 110 units for seniors. Our smallest is a single family first time home buyer house. And we have sort of everything in between.
Oh, that's amazing that you can serve both of those product types.
Yeah, the smaller stuff is harder. So that's good to know. But all different types of populations. So seniors, homeless individuals, homeless families, youth aging out of foster care, essential workers, people with disabilities, all is like a range of different population types in the buildings.
And I noticed as I was preparing for the conversation and learning more about Harborlight, we're obviously supporting you on a few projects. And I didn't really think of the difference between affordable housing and nonprofit affordable housing. And as I started to dig deeper, I really started to understand more of the mission. And so it was becoming a mass certified community development corporation, like a big move for the organization to better serve your target population.
Yeah, it was a huge deal because it really allows this leveraged philanthropy mechanism. So it was a constant source of really what it was is operating revenue or pre-development capital. That's the way we use it, but it's flexible. So it was a big deal and it happened 13, 14 years ago because it gave us the ability to function at a community scale level because you were instead of usually if you're doing development, right, you want the biggest deal you can get because a 6 unit deal and a 60 unit deal is the same amount of work, but not the same amount of return. And so for us to function at a community scale, by which we mean smaller, and function at a community speed, by which we mean slower, right? So you have to then have enough resources to keep people going on a deal that are not strictly related to the deal itself. And so the only way for us to do a 25 unit supportive housing deal, which is what we're doing in Rowley right now for seniors and young adults with developmental delays, is that becoming a 40H certified CDC allowed us to access the community investment tax credit. And the community investment tax credit allowed us to access this leveraged philanthropy that now is, substantial part of the budget. And we use that to pay for community pacing, advocacy work, and resident services work in a way that we couldn't from a business model standpoint if we didn't have it.
Yeah, tell me more about your resident services work and kind of like helping support the success of the individuals rather than just provide housing.
Yeah, so we generally, we for all of the cases, if you view it as almost like an automobile, right? We have a certain chassis that we're making, right? So Ford uses the F-150 chassis and builds a bunch of stuff on it. I'm making that up. I don't know if they do, but so Harborlight makes we make an affordable real estate, an economically accessible real estate platform. We know how to finance it, how to get it built, how to operate it. And we could just push that out into the world and it would do a good thing. But what you find out is depending on how you're targeting the population of the users for that building, if they have additional needs beyond the economic stability, so beyond economic accessibility, how do we how do we create metrics for those particular needs, and then how do we provide services for those needs to make them successful? And so that would be, if it's frail seniors, we have certain partners to reach certain objectives, which are largely around can people avoid nursing home care as a housing mechanism? Can they get care on site and have an improved quality of life? And can they maintain, their golden years in a space where they don't have to leave before they want to? Different set of metrics than if we do family housing or even formerly homeless family housing, where we're looking at do you have access to health care? Are the kids in school? Are the parents growing their income and the assets over time? And what's the quality of life? Different set of metrics, both built on the same affordability chassis. And so we're looking at each group, each building, each population saying, all right, we have the housing. Now, what do we need to put on top of this to promote both the quality of life goals that we have everywhere, and then more specifically, the outcome goals we have for that particular population that we think are what we're trying to achieve? And that could change. And it's different depending on the population. But that's sort of the idea. So the resident services are meant to provide support for that second tier goals. Oh, we want to help people have quality of life for their children on the site. Then that affects. We're going to have playgrounds on the site. We're going to add programming like this summer. We have one of the municipalities running their summer park program at a site because there's not a way for the kids to get to those programs. So or what, what is the, you're almost trying to hear, it's like a song, right? Like, what is the population? And you're asking them, what do you get? What do we need to do here? And then you're trying to create that service physically proximate, either yourselves or through a partner.
Yeah, and I think I forget the exact language you just used, but it's like beyond they have needs beyond this economic constraint. And I think sometimes or oftentimes those are like chicken before the egg, like they're complementing in the challenges they face. I'm fortunate to work with Habitat, Metro West, Greater Worcester here in Mass and serve a similar population. And so when I learned about this Mass Community Development Corporation and the people that you're serving at Harborlight, really resonated with me with the work that Habitat is doing. And so when we look at affordable housing, that's 80% of AMI, area median income, which are still like people that are fairly well off and fairly independent. But when it comes to serving, say, 50 or 30% AMI, which is the people that you're serving, they need a lot more support, and it's not something you can really solve in a traditional affordable housing development, which is where this nonprofit and philanthropy work kind of come into solving this problem.
You got it. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. If my problem was strictly economics, right? Like the cost of my housing is X, I make Y, I need support for the distance between X and Y. That's that the housing solves the problem, you're done. Right. But if the problem is, usually the way it goes is my economic problem is even wider, right? And to your point, chicken and egg wise, who knows? But the issues that we have that are related to that, and different kinds of hardships, traumas, et cetera, that somebody might have, that now you can't just, the housing isn't going to get it done by itself.
Yeah, you're not putting them in a position to succeed with just housing.
And that's the goal, right? You want to help them succeed, and we'll frame it as quality of life today. Like, you're stable and your life has good quality today. Yes. You're asking for that feedback. And then it's sort of, okay, what are the long term goals based on the population? And they vary. So, like, we have housing, for example, in Salem, that's for adults that were formerly homeless individuals. Very micro unit housing, service coordinator on the site. I don't have the same goals there as I have in a family project where we're investing a lot of money in kids programming on the site. My goals there are like, can you maintain the tenancy? Do you have health care? Do you have a source of employment or income? And like, it's a different set of goals.
Yes. Basic needs met. Do you have food and water?
You
All
got it.
that stuff.
So you're trying to match your services to what the population's needs are in addition to economics, right? And to your point, we're assuming that all of our deals have needs to support success in addition to the economics. The economics is like the entry.
What life experience, Andrew, kind of led you to this career in social justice, affordable housing? Something stand out?
Good question. It's sort of an accident, I guess. This is what I usually tell people, my kids included. The quickest version is, when I was a kid, my parents, very working class folks. My father's a carpenter, my mother's a hairdresser. To give you a sense of the soil, my mother's 82 and she still works 2 days a week cutting hair. So I think it's partially because she doesn't want to talk to my father about money. So she wants to, she wants to be able to say it's her money and she's going to do what she wants to do with it, which is pretty awesome. But that'll give you a sense of it. But they were very serious people about living out what they thought were sort of their faith commitments in the world. And so I grew up in that soup. When I was a really little kid, my parents took me to South America. My middle brother's adopted. So they took me to pick him up. I had another brother after that, but I did. So I had this pretty profound experience when I was 8 of like developing country, orphanage, a lot of kids, a lot of suffering. I didn't know that was unusual, like that I would be there, or I didn't know anything really that's not what working class people sort of went to do. But those are the kind of parents I had.
That life experience, even at 8, is something that resonated, and you almost learned from that experience years after you had it, right?
Exactly. It had no bearing on, my brother was, I was going to swear on the podcast, but I probably shouldn't. He was a pain for me from the get go, right? Still is. And, I love him and I'm grateful for him, but most of my experience was like, who is this kid eating my snacks? But yeah, that was a huge impactor. And then when I got to be a young adult, I took my first gig working at a homeless shelter in Atlantic City. And my gig was I worked a 3 to 11 shift on the weekends, and I had two jobs. One was I had to get the guys in the shower because everybody had a shower, and I had like 100 homeless guys and me, and I had to get them out of the shower in 3 minutes because those were the rules. So I was like a carnival barker in this hallway at 23 years old. Half the guys didn't want to get in the shower, and half of them didn't want to get out of the shower in 3 minutes. So I'd have to yell into the shower, Billy, don't make me come in there. I'm going to get wet and you're going to be embarrassed. I had
And
no
you gotta
idea what
be
I'm doing.
creative. You gotta be creative and, like, social to get to move all those different personalities.
Keep them moving. So it was like big exposures, and so really by the time I got to be in my 20s, I started doing social work, but I was running into so many situations that had housing problems. So I went back, just got some extra training and said, okay, how can I put my hand to this plow? But it was really rooted in this philosophical idea of there's an order to this and a kindness, and people are struggling with having basic places to live. And rooted in my sort of my parents' commitment to that and their model.
You got to see the very real pressing issues that these people were facing on a daily
Yeah.
basis as a young adult.
Yeah, you got it.
I see you went to theological seminary as an undergrad.
I did. Yeah, I did. I often don't talk about that in public for various reasons. And it's a little bit fraught now, especially in the national dialogue about sort of who owns what part of what social group. But I did. And I did a lot of theology and ethics. So I was sort of very interested in the connection between what do you believe about the world and the divine, and then what do you do about it? Um, and a lot less about specific theological stuff. I wanted to know sort of how do we practically do the things in the world, which I think is probably related to how my parents behaved. They didn't talk about what they were going to do, but this is what they thought they were supposed to do, so they did it. And so definitely that's what I did.
It was like, it's shaping your moral compass, your ethics.
Exactly. And people will ask now, sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, you seem very patient," or "You seem like, why are you so committed to this?" They're curious about the edge of the intensity, and I think that is related to the ballast, sort of the ethical moral compass ballast. If you really think it's a serious thing, it's different. It's not a hobby, right? Like I could do something else for work. This is not like for fun. This is you mean to do this in the world.
You can have conviction in what you say because you have that moral confidence and then you've put in the work to understand the root of the problem and you're passionate about how to solve
You got it. That's a great summary. And none of that was on purpose, right? I guess that's the point. Like I didn't go about saying what I'm going to do is like,
it. Yeah, this wasn't a plan from 23 and you kinda you figured out the vehicle to serve your purpose along the way.
yeah, I think I was young enough I was still trying to figure out like, what am I here for? What am I doing?
Yeah. I mean, when I think about the population that you're serving, like say the homeless, the people that need help and told to take a shower, told to get out of the shower, and then the challenges that they face outside of just economic realities. And then I see this life of service, and then you went on to community economic development. It's almost like you realize these are the people I want to serve, and the best way I can do that is by making housing the anchor of my future.
Yeah, I really prefer the direct service work. Like I had a lot more fun when I did the direct work, but you got it exactly right. Was if I'm trying to do as most good that I can do here, and I can learn how to do these things, I'll be able to help more people. It's a lot less fun.
What was your work at Beverly Bookstraps?
Yeah, Beverly Bootstraps is a local service provider here on the North Shore. So I was the outreach director there way back in the day. And so I was like the social worker type, like caseworker type. So this is where at the time I was involved in two founding boards for housing groups on the North Shore, but I had no idea what I was doing on the housing side. I just worked thousands and thousands of cases. So I spent time in the public housing neighborhoods and affordable housing units. And I was really helping problem solve families at a micro level. Like, oh, my kid, is can I need to try to get him to go to summer camp, or we have a problem with DCF, or they didn't go to school and they're going to have this issue. So I would sit in on all these meetings and visit all these families, and it was really just trying to solve problem by problem by problem. What's the issue? What's the issue? And that was what drove the housing interest. was so many of the problems were housing related.
Yeah. You became acutely aware of like a root cause of the problem.
Yeah, yeah, and I kept pulling it, like, why is what? And you realize, like, oh, the macroeconomics of this are impossible.
How did this lead to your work at the guest house in Milwaukee? You're growing up in New Jersey, greater New York. You come up to New England.
Yeah, I went out there for educational opportunity at the time for one of my family members, and it was not on again not on purpose, but the person was going to Marquette University, and so that was my first executive director's job. That was a wild gig because I love the folks there. So shout out to everybody in Milwaukee. But it was my first executive director's gig. So I was like 31. I was from out of town, right? And I thought it was the greatest thing, right? I came home, hey, I got the job, and it was like an ambush, right? And they're very polite in the Midwest, so they what they didn't tell me was like, oh, this organization is failing, and you're the only one stupid enough to take the
Here's
job.
your
So
first executive director's job. You have a sinking organization, and you now be a turnaround specialist.
you got it. I didn't have enough money to make payroll in the first month, so I had to borrow 20 grand. You're a board member at Habitat, right? I borrowed 20 grand from a board member, literally, to make payroll. Imagine getting that phone call
Yeah. Hey, I'm your new executive director. I need 20 from somebody,
from
please.
somebody. I'm 31, right? I've never done it before. I need some cash. And he loaned me the money on a receivable.
What an amazing individual. Because I'm sure he also isn't, or they are not totally confident they're getting their money back.
No, 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 and he's a great guy. He's a great guy. Not that I know this will get that far, but Paul Everly, if you're out there, I remember the 20 grand, bro. So he helped me with that, and it worked. And so we started going around to talk to all these folks. But it was the intersection between, okay, now I was the exec, and we started collaborating with a group out of Chicago on supportive housing. It was my first real exposure to, oh, you can smash together this tax credit financing and this real estate development and these really intense service needs and make a great product that solves huge problems. And that was super exciting to me. So there I had 76 beds, shelter beds. My office was right over the way they did it there is the guys had to line up every day. So I would tell my crew, like, my office was right over the line. I could look out my office window at night and see the line of guys trying to get in, which is pretty damn motivational. And you realize, like, oh, if I don't get this right, some of these guys don't have anywhere to sleep. And if I can get it right, more of these guys have someplace to live. So that's back to the conviction every day. And so we were fortunate enough to thank God to right the ship there. And then we started building some supportive housing, which was cool. So the first project I was involved with was on Island Ave in Milwaukee, right just off of Marquette University's campus.
That's an amazing story, Andrew. Congrats on
Thank you.
solving that puzzle and continuing to do good out there in Milwaukee. If I have my timing correct, you mentioned the merger of the 8 organizations to kinda form the Harborlight of today. Is this around the time that you joined them as executive director?
It is, yeah. So I came back to Beverly or to Boston area in like '07. I took the gig here in late '07, and then '08 we went through this strategic planning process, meeting every 2 weeks, with different representatives of different constituents. It's like, like a little UN kind of experience in the basement of a church. I would bring the sandwiches and the whiteboard markers, and we would eat and bang out the next stage of planning. And by the end of that year, we said, okay, we're going to change the mission, change the board, change the name, change the bylaws, but all driven by what are we trying to do here? The issue we want to solve problems related to housing north of Boston. So when we had that conviction, we were able to change the logistics. And so yeah, then we did all the mergers and the first big set, 1109, a couple more later that year, and then a couple more in 10 and 11. So yeah, you'd have the timing right.
We've talked about 30% AMI, area median income, for the income level of the people we're serving. For those at home, like, what does that actually mean for the people you serve? What is that annual income?
Yeah, so 30% of area median income is a HUD metric that's based, and this will be important for people if you have them in a different geography. So in our geography, we're dominated by HUD draws a line around Boston. and they'll say, here's the data, the census data in that region. That'll be different for, Austin, Texas, or, Bangor, Maine, or what, the data's different,
Location dependent.
location dependent. But for us, that's about, that's like in the low 30s. So like call it $32,000 a year. It's updated every spring. And so for an individual, it's about that amount. For a family, it's probably, family of four, that's probably closer to mid 50s. And so that economic unit number, the lowest income tier that HUD will demonstrate is that tier. So everything below that is below 30% area median, which is, so it's not the same as the poverty line, right? It's a different
Which
number.
for anybody that lives up here knows how difficult it is to live on that type of income.
Yeah, it's just a math problem at that point. If you're $2,000 a month for rent and you make $32,000 a year pre-tax, you got a problem.
What systems or barriers stand in the way of delivering affordable housing?
Yeah, so there's a few key ones. I'd say three dominant ones. One is land use, so zoning, what you're allowed to build where. A lot of people are surprised by this, especially in Massachusetts, but try to tell them, look, we have 351 different communities and we have 351 different sets of rules about what you can build where. It's kind of like having a public highway where we say, okay, Fords can drive here, but not Datsuns, if anybody remembers those. And this section of highway is just for Ferraris. And this is, like that. It's like that. So it's inconceivable. So if they tell me I can only build a house 35 feet and below, and it has to have 2 acres minimum for the lot, and it has to have private water and private sewer, and you can't have any multifamily, meaning any apartments or condos. What you get from that kind of housing is very big box housing with a lot of sprawl and almost all white people. This is sort of the way and you look at the census data. That's not me being
The
euphemistic.
data supports that that's what happened in the past.
So you have to look at, so the zoning is a huge one. Second one is economics on the affordable housing side. We're largely driven by the low income housing tax credit, which is an allocation per state based on head count. So New York and California and Texas get the most, right? Rhode Island gets the least, or something to that effect. So even if I have 50 deals cooking at a time, I can't get enough money to do them. I can only apply 2 projects a year, and we're only going to get funded on a certain pace. So there's a fabrication to the limit of resources that slows it down. So if I can get the zoning, meaning I can get permission locally, huge deal and hurdle. Can I get the money? And then the third one is sort of social pressure that's not formal around, will people oppose you? Like, will somebody try to block you in the court? Will they try to block you in the permitting?
Yeah, the NIMBY movement, right? The not in my backyard type of thing. And that almost relates to zoning, right? Because it's like if zoning were more open to this type of development, the NIMBY movement wouldn't actually be able to prevent affordable housing.
Yeah, in some ways, the zoning is an enforcement mechanism of the NIMBY movement.
Sure. Yeah, I've never heard it framed that way. Yeah, it's like an enforcement mechanism of the strength of the current community rather than what's best for the future of the community.
Yeah, and they do the same thing sometimes with public infrastructure, like should we have a sewer or not? It's another way to enforce exclusion.
Sure. Or yeah, and then economic drivers are also the constraint to infrastructure upgrades, which there you go. You got the cart before the horse type of thing, right? And zoning, I definitely agree that zoning is a big issue, especially in Boston, greater Boston, and more the process of like updating or approving a project, what happens afterwards. Like when I think of the intent of zoning is to kind of dictate the growth corridors of, say, a community. I live in a suburb of greater Boston in a single family neighborhood. If somebody put an industrial building across the street from me because they bought like a number of homes, it would be very odd to the community. So like that's where I think zoning is great, but it should also have some other reform to make sure that there is these mechanisms for affordable housing and multifamily housing and density to happen.
Totally agree. Yeah, and we can do that, I think is the point, right? Like I'm not opposed to zoning writ large. I think it makes sense, right? You don't want to have like a trash incinerator next to residential areas, right? So I think we can use it intelligently, but just like with any other tool, it really will become the manifestation of our collective social identity. So if we view affordable housing or multifamily housing at all, which is not affordable in the formal sense, but in the informal sense, and the goal is, okay, I'm going to block this. You can then use zoning to say, oh, we only allow single family houses in this entire town. That's a good indicator of like, okay, well, we understand what you mean. That like they could figure out, like we'll often help the communities. We'll say, tell us where you want to put the multifamily housing in your town, and how can we do this in an intelligent way that's complementary to your other goals. But a lot of times they'll use it as a sort of a pure exclusion mechanism.
Understood. Yeah. How you frame that conversation starts to lead to the conversation behind the actual topic.
We proposed one time a project in Hamilton where we were going to build 100 units, 108 units on 20 acres. So not very dense. And we were doing it in like pods, like 6 to 8 unit pods. So for the construction audience, it was like a big house, a little house barn design, right? And my architect, who's a genius, Stan Samasco, figured it out. And so it was like 8 apartments, but it looked like the big house, little house barns in the same neighborhood. There was just like, I forget how many we had, 12 of them up a road on 20 acres. It was mayhem. people people just they couldn't, they couldn't do it, but we were below the height limit for a single family house. None of the buildings were large, right? The setbacks, it just didn't matter.
So that ultimately faced opposition and prevented that
Huge.
development from happening.
Yep.
And that rub, and you're even trying to design to fit the fabric of that community is what you're really getting across.
Exactly. And I went to a couple hundred meetings for that myself, for that site, to try to help people like, okay, because what you're really trying to do, it's a heart condition, right? It's an internal communal condition. You're trying to help people what would be the way this could look and work well. And it was, well, not this tall, not this big, not this many, not so you're like, okay, you just keep turning, 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 turning. And eventually I had a guy come into a meeting on that one because we were trying to get him in to say, all right, how many units? And we said, all right, if we don't do 100, like, how about this many? How about 80? How about 7? No, no, no. How about if we move it here? How about if we move it there? No, no, no. It got down to his answer was, what if we did a single house? No. So 20 acres, not a single house.
Yeah, so you can't debate illogic.
Yeah, nowhere to
On
go with that
Yeah,
one.
right. That yeah,
So
that's running into a wall there.
yeah, so it's a yes, but having it be inclusive and not as a tool for exclusion.
Talking about the economic constraint here. So obviously, one, there's funding, and I imagine if funding, there's a long line of not only your organization but a lot of organizations that are kind of jostling to get that funding to create these developments. How important does your your company's experience in delivering similar projects, and then also the budget you're able to put together to like not show wasteful spending? Does the cost of your development, your performer, become really important in attracting that funding?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So I'd say experience. My buddy and colleague here, Tim Donovan, I will always say our track record is sort of our calling card. And so definitely, if you have experience, because people you're playing with big numbers, big complicated numbers, and real world real estate. I tell people this is like market rate real estate, but a lot harder. um, and so yes, the experience helps you get in the door for sure. On the cost containment side, there's been a lot of pressure on that over recent years. I'll tell you what's been difficult with that lately is there are a lot of constituents and sub-constituents that hang additional cost onto our deals. And we're sort of politically agnostic here to this. So for example, right now we're having to deal with this thing called BABA, which maybe you're familiar with, Build
I'm
America
not
Buy America.
familiar with that.
It's a Biden administration restriction on domestic supply of product, which we're generally in support of. But it is so cumbersome and so challenging. On the deal we're building right now, it's created about $300,000 in cost increases.
Yeah, on what scale of a project?
Yeah, that's 45 units. So that's probably, it's probably a $30 million deal. So as a ratio, not a ton. But when you're trying to create containment, all of these different constituents are saying, make it this energy efficient, make it this small, make it where you contribute to the communities these ways, only buy stuff domestically. So like by the time you're done, your cost pressures are up and up and up. So it does help if you can keep the costs down. It is painful out there. And I'll say between the administrations, you're dealing with the tariff impact on supply chain on one hand,
Conflicting policies, so it's not they're not working together, right?
they don't work. And then on the other hand, you're dealing with it. And people, we're trying to work it out. People are nationally trying to find ways through, but it increases, it escalates cost unnecessarily. So it does help us if we keep the cost down, but the cost environment is painful.
If you know us at all at H&O, like we are super attentive to wasteful spending. We are like we train in estimating, we're estimating buildings, and it was always at first it was kind of looking at the market rate side where developers need to be cost conscious, and we saw that there was wasteful spending in buildings. So we're like, if we can measure this, now we can actually start to make sure that we're not wasting, because you can't manage what you don't measure. And then as we got exposed and did more and more affordable housing, like it's almost more painful to see wasteful spending in affordable because it's funded through taxpayer, federal and state income. So like we're all paying for these houses. So like I want there to be mechanisms to make sure that we're using people and entities and processes that create economic delivery and not wasteful spending of the tax dollar.
Totally agreed. And I think I actually think at a policy level, we can probably incentivize that better. Like what is the why is the savings a good idea?
Yeah. Is there any conversation around that of the policy change, or is that a hard, long road?
Yeah, it's doable. I'd say what makes it a harder, longer road in the moment is the like I mentioned, all of these non-local pressures on deals, makes it harder because you're operating within this. It's not sort of 1 + 1 = 2, right? You're operating within this universe where it's like, oh, I need this fire suppression equipment. They only make this in Germany. I can't get a US comp, you know, and they're like, well, you have to. You're like, I can't. They're like, it doesn't. There is none. And so you're trying to keep the cost down, and or for example, you're trying to hook up to a utility, right? Have you guys seen this? We're trying to hook up to a utility. We have a solar system, so we're trying to be really efficient. And the utility says, "Oh, I can't hook you up for 120 days." We ran a building on the North Shore a couple winters ago on a temp propane heater to keep the heat in the building live. Brand new building, done, powered, ready to go. They wouldn't turn on the power. So I'm literally in my mind, I'm running $1,000 of propane
$1,000 a day.
a day, just to
And you
keep the
have
heat
to
on.
do that. Like you can't lose the building in the dead of winter.
I can't. Like I'm mid construction, you can imagine, right? I got guys in there working, putting stuff in. Not that the building has to be warm. I don't mind.
Yeah, but it can't be frozen.
It can't be frozen. So and I can almost hear the generator from my office like 5 miles away because
Yeah,
I can
you hear
feel
that
the.
at night sleeping.
I'm like, yeah, that cost that other 10 minutes cost $5, and that was $5, and we spent like 45 grand in propane that year. Anyway, I'll be on and on about that. But you're right. There's opportunity there.
There's opportunity. Andrew, do you believe that all forms of housing creation lead to more affordable housing?
Yes.
You want to create more affordable, we got to build more classic supply and demand. I don't know if it hits your world and nonprofit affordable housing, but it's certainly a big conversation in my world is the proposed rent control in Mass, which as we record today, this will be posted later. Seems like the Mass Supreme Court just threw out rent control, so it won't be on the ballot in November. But from your seat, as someone who clearly is passionate about helping people and creating affordable housing, like is rent control a viable solution to create affordable housing?
Yeah, I don't think it is. And we were opposed to the ballot initiative. But I will say that, after that, I'll put a big comma and say we were also eyeball deep in trying to negotiate a compromise. So, like you said, this will roll out later. By the time it does, I may be at an event tomorrow and I may be in an op-ed 2 days from now where I say, essentially we need to compromise on this. Partially, so I'm very sympathetic to my friends on the advocacy side who are just saying we are in so much pain, do something, and their frustration with the pace of change. But we're developers, so I'm aware of it's not so much the any gouging. We're asking for a problem. For example, I'm 5'7" to say, I don't think it's, I think I should be able to dunk a basketball. And I'm going to legislate that I can dunk a basketball.
Hoops
Well,
should be
unless you make the
dropped for
hoop
heaven's sakes.
substantially lower, or give me a trampoline. It's not that kind of problem. I try to tell you, this is not the kind of party we're in. So I don't think constraining supply is not going, doing anything that will constrain supply is not going to help us. It's going to move capital outside the state. It's going to create other disincentives. Landlords are going to have to short their buildings to generate the return. I think it's a very bad idea, but I understand where it's coming from. So I will say, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well said, Andrew. I think when I look at the problem, I see a big education gap. It's like I don't think the greater population understands the importance of institutional capital coming to Massachusetts to create housing and ultimately a major driver of our economy and jobs and all of these things. And so it's like, while I have empathy and we absolutely need to solve affordable housing and support the people in need, rent control, while well intentioned, I think has very, very harsh negative consequences that the voting population or people don't actually see.
I agree. And I think so. I agree with you 100% with that. I do think I was supportive of a compromise because I thought and I still do, and I still expect that actually. So if this gets recorded, I think the move by the SJC is going to result in a longer term compromise process before either the next session or the next possible ballot initiative, depending on it. There's going to have to be a way to shift from rent control to some stabilization and tenant protection so that I think we're going to have to give some mechanisms where the turbulence on cost is not so bumpy for people, in addition to not forcing capital out of the state. Like capital is going to go where it gets the best return. It's not, you and I are not inventing that. That's what is going to happen. Um, I'm trying to play. I'm brokering. I'm trying to play in the middle here, which is like I don't agree with the ballot initiative. I can get my head around some stabilization measures as a gesture to people, but we have to be very careful because if we screw this up, we're going to be like saying, well, Andrew is now required to be able to dunk a basketball, and of course I won't be able to, and I'm just going to get hurt trying.
I appreciate the perspective and I appreciate you sharing your work and experience here. I'm very curious about the mission behind the Dirty Deeds Project and how it connects to what you do.
Yeah, so we're the Dirty Deeds Project was a project we borrowed the idea from University of Minnesota had created this algorithm where they could search registries of deeds for racially exclusive language. And so we partnered with them a number of years ago and the NAACP on the North Shore to essentially use their system, their data crawler, and we partnered with the Northern Essex or Southern Essex Registry of Deeds and checked that data to see what was in there. And largely to your question is like what's behind it. So I think for us, what's behind a lot of this is we don't like any scenarios where housing has been used to unfairly disadvantage or advantage other groups. And we have a history of using housing in this country as a mechanism to disadvantage, particularly related to race or class, specifically brown and black families, specifically black families. So the data is profound. You may remember about 10 years ago, the Globe came out with an article series on their Spotlight series that talked about wealth inequality by race in Greater Boston. And one of the data points was that black families in Greater Boston had an average net worth of $8, 8.00. And white families, it was $248,000. And the difference between those two numbers is largely related to the appreciation in homes from, about 1900 to about now. And so this all was driven for us by a book called The Color of Law by a legal scholar named Richard Rothstein, who delineated the ways in which housing policy had been used to segregate societies and then economically advantage some and disadvantage others. So we're big sort of fairness people. It is unfair, especially based on any kind of exclusion, but race in this case, that somebody would have had an advantage somebody else wouldn't have, and that would have been monetized over time. So if I'm a black sergeant and my peer is a white sergeant, coming out of World War II, and I get the benefit of GI Bill and a VA loan at a lower rate and access to a new community that was constructed for new families on 5,000 square foot lots. And that asset appreciated time over time over time to turn into real cash value to my descendants 3 generations later. And my peer, the black sergeant, my peer, same rank, same income, same job type, same service to the country, didn't get the access to the rate, the interest rate, or wasn't allowed to buy in a community, which is what we found in the data, right? And we want people to realize that the existence of segregated communities in greater Boston today and the differential in net worth are the results of intentional public policies 100 years ago. So the whole point was to say, we did this. So this is what the income is, the impact is today. What are we going to then? What can we do? You can't unmake it all. It's not possible. So how do you respond? How do we not keep doing it? And how do we, in good faith, create a gesture to the past from an ethical standpoint to honor and say, all right, we did this. There are advantages. How do we make it right? I'm a big how do you make it right? You've been on jobs probably, right? Where something goes sideways on a construction job, it's probably 8 different people's fault. And you end up in the meeting where you're like, okay, how are we just going to make this right for everybody?
That's a good life motto there. How am I going to make this right? Right? To be human is to be flawed. You're going to make mistakes, but how do
It's inevitable. And so the Dirty Deeds thing was really to create historical, geographically proximate examples so that people knew in real terms, oh, this happened right here, not in Alabama. It's easy for New England progressives to be like, this is not an us problem. We're the abolitionists. And you're like, well, here, let's look at this map. So we have now a map that shows you here's all the places. Here's the language. We'll show the language. No Armenians, no Italians, no Jews, nobody of black descent, no Irish, right in the deed.
wow.
That's still on the books.
This is so informative, and thank you for sharing on because I would bet a small percentage of people actually understood that happened like right here in Massachusetts.
And we wanted it to set baseline so people could say, okay, we own the benefit perhaps of that experience. So now we have to be accountable to the reality of it. How do we all agree this happened? Now what do we do? How do we make it right? It's easier to dismiss it if it happens somewhere else, right? Or to deny its existence because you're like, that's just an opinion. You're like, it's not. Here's the deed. So we were copying actual deed photographs because you could see like the font from 100 years ago and the deed was different and kind of funky, right? So we were showing real deeds like this is a deed in Linfield today, that shows like, you could not sell your house to a black or an Italian owner. Now, of course, in my family was blended, right? So half my wife is black and I'm Italian. So, we part of this for us is like, well, we couldn't buy this house either way. In either
You
direction. I
could
can't
buy this
you
either
can't
way.
buy it, nobody buy the house. And most people would agree, like, that's not fair.
Yeah, and how do we make it right?
How do you make it right
Right,
then?
which it comes back like I always think so much of the root cause of like challenge or friction in a society can also stem from like a lack of education or perspective. So I think what I hear this Dirty Deeds project is really like an education mission to make sure that people understand the problem so that we can then talk about a solution because it's really hard to talk about a solution if we don't have a mutual understanding of the problem.
Right. And so we got no benefit from, like, it didn't help us do a project, but it helped us because a lot of I mean, not to get too sort of esoteric about it, right, but a lot of the housing problems, just as you described them, it's the manifestation of our collective sort of expectations about who gets to live where and how they got there and why. And so our zoning and all of these other things are logistics. They're mechanisms to like create in the real world what we think society should be. And so why we wanted to put that in there was to say, and I'll even tell people I could build stuff. I could build it faster. I could build more of it. Like the building is not I mean, it's hard. Don't get me wrong, but that's not really the problem. The problem is that we collectively assume the way it should be. And until we can get to that part, we'll just find new ways to discriminate against each other. We'll just make a new way. we'll come up with a new idea. So it used to be legal, in the 30s, it was legal to say you cannot use a federally FHA insurance to build housing where black people will live. Federal policy. This is to Rothstein's book. Now you can't do that now. The housing reform in the 50s and 60s, you can't do that now. The problem is well, we keep doing it. We just can't do it like that.
Yeah. Just doesn't have the same label.
Exactly. We'll just find another way to because it's in here. It's not out here. Right. We still own that expectation. And so we'll find another tool to do what we mean to do. So unless we start meaning to do it different, the rest of it is just detail. So the dirty deeds was a hope that somebody might say, "Oh, I need to do that different."
Andrew, if we look forward, and since your service area right now is in the North Shore of Massachusetts, and we look forward, we look at the housing crisis that we face here, the housing affordability crisis. Do you have any ideas or perspectives on what you would like to see change with affordable housing policy in Mass that would help open up and create more housing faster?
Yeah, I think two or three things. One is I think the MBTA law, for all of its flaws, the 3A law that just got passed, is a big positive in the sense that it changed the dynamic. One way or the other, we need to have more land that is developable for housing at any income level. To your point about, does all housing create cheaper,
And the
more.
3A policy, that was the proposed rent control. Is that what you're talking about?
Now, 3A policy was the multifamily zoning MBTA law.
The MBTA Communities Act. Yeah, for it had a lot of flaws, but it did drive a ton of housing creation.
Yeah, and drove the idea that everybody in Eastern Massachusetts has to have part of their land zoned for multifamily housing. That was a major. Now, so working that out is going to be huge, and it has. It's not that it doesn't have problems; it does. But we have so that being the case, I would say we must have land that can be developed for housing that is lower cost, either formal affordability, big A, subsidized, or informal. After World War II, we did 5,000 square foot lots, starter homes, 1,200 square foot capes. There's a lot of movement now at the legislative level, like make it possible to build a starter home that people can afford at a middle class wage. We don't have that now. You're in what's getting built is very high cost.
Yeah, I don't know how you solve that problem.
And they're gonna have to create. So now there's a new tax incentive for it, but you need the local municipalities to zone for it. Give me an area of town where you can do 5,000-foot lots by right.
Yeah, that zoning has to change for lot size to come down and create that because the land basis alone drives you to build too much of a house. Yeah.
Make the infrastructure exist, right? And make the land value possible, and then you can incentivize it through the tax codes. I think those are they're gonna have to make as opposed to what we do now is we back up from, well, this is what's here. We're New Englanders, right? Whatever is here is the best. As opposed to like backing in from how do we get like your questioning is like how do we get where we want to go? And I think we have to flip a little bit and say if we're trying to get to here, I have 5 kids. If I want my kids to be able to buy a house in Massachusetts, right? They need a rung. They need that 1,200 square foot cape, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Like figure out a way to make that cheaper. And that's land basis, infrastructure. Maybe even we weigh in on, material supplies. Maybe there are things that can get, where if we can do enough of them at one time, there's a way to make the aggregated cost cheaper for supply. You'll start to churn some of that more. So yeah, I think we're going to have to do more with the local zoning on what we will try to achieve and state policy to do that. A lot of what we do now is we're working around our existing systems, and that's what makes it so. Everything is like every time we do a thing, it's like a new snowflake, right? I haven't done a deal with the same architectural plans ever.
Yeah, you can't repeat. Yeah, you can't repeat because the lots aren't the same. You have different constraints, different problems to solve. That's one of the hardest the going back to the cost thing, that's one of the biggest challenges to draw like comparisons or correlations project to project is because they are their own individual Swiss watch. So there's always a variable that you can point to justify where you came out rather than having enough data to guide you to an actual destination with confidence.
Exactly, I totally agree, and a lot of that is because it's so hard to get a site that if I get a site, my team will probably joke. I'm like, make it work. I don't care about the topography. I don't care about like tell me how it's make it work. Because it's either this site or no site. So I'll take this site. Y- and
Going back to creating, like, all forms of housing help create affordable housing and that starter home, and I know we could go off on a million tangents here, but I'll kinda help summarize in this, like, I look at the demand for senior housing and also the benefits of, like, aging in community rather than aging in isolation, which I think is, like, a societal stigma that forces you to say that that's independence, and the demand for those types, like, I think we have to double, like, senior living housing in the country by, like, 2030, which isn't gonna happen,
no, we're not
right?
doing it.
But it's like, if we're able to change housing policy and zoning to create that type of housing, they might move out of the empty nesters might move out of those homes that make entry level homes more attainable for the younger population. And it's a timing game, right? Because right now, we might be losing young professionals in their 20s to other tier 1 cities or other communities in the country. When those young professionals, if we can keep them here in Massachusetts, they're the drivers of the future economy. So it's like we need to give them a reason to be here and make them that an affordable life place to be.
And we can, right? To your point, right? Like we know this. So I'm like, wait, all right. So if we know it, what would I'm almost like, I almost want to tell that, like, as a business plan, what would we need to do to achieve a certain rate of retention of new graduates at these income levels in these places? I'm like, it's going to be like a dozen things. Pick them off.
It sounds like you've done strategic planning, a turnaround, and those sort of things. We talk about we remove the constraints and come back to first principle thinking, right? Like, what's the problem? What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah, and part of our challenge, I think, we love our forms of government is that because we have so many competing interests and dimensions of power, it's hard to pull. Like we might all know what to do, but it has to pass town meeting, and then the legislature has to agree to it, and the banks will have to agree. Like it's hard to get everybody to agree on a direction, which is why I thought the MBTA law, with all of its challenges, was awesome.
Was a net positive.
It was a net positive in a direction that created predictability, so capital could follow. But we don't. We want everybody to vote on everything, right? Like it's a, which I'm like, all right, that's fine. What you're going to get is kids are moving to Durham, North Carolina. That's what's going to happen in Austin, and that's the outcome.
Yeah, and we want to keep those people here in Mass for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to keep them, make it possible. They're not paying. You know, you're not going to get a 25-year-old kid who's like, oh yeah, I'll pay $900,000 for a starter house.
Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your mission. Like, I love the intentionality and the passion behind what you're doing. So thank you for sharing that here on design development. I'd like to ask, you seem like a lifelong learner. I love the objective thinking. Is there a book or podcast that you would share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I will give two maybe. So I think the Richard Rothstein book, The Color of Law, is, if I had to pick one book for people to be reading, awesome. Going to give you a real good sense of the last century or more of historic housing policy at the state and local levels to set that sort of intellectual level about how do we get here. And then organizationally, I always love, I love Good to Great, Jim Collins. I think it's from a assess, decide, move on type thing. I just think it's the best. So
Yeah, it's a great book. For one, I also like built my business awareness and leadership through studying books like Good to Great. So absolutely appreciate that work. Andrew, thanks again. I wish you and Harborlight. I'm excited to see the impact you have on the community in the years to come.
look forward to it. Thanks for the audience. Be good.